I thought moving out would finally give me the privacy I deserved, but my family had other plans. For months, my sister Evangeline and my parents had been using their spare key to enter my apartment whenever they pleased, eating my food, using my things, treating my home like their personal storage unit. I tried talking to them, changing locks, even threatening to call the police. Nothing worked. So I moved out without telling them. What they discovered in my old apartment 3 days later would destroy our family forever and expose a betrayal that ran deeper than I ever imagined. But before I tell you how my family's greed led to their ultimate downfall, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. If you have ever dealt with boundary-crossing family members, hit that like button, because this story will show you exactly why setting boundaries matters. Subscribe for more family drama stories because what happens next will shock you. And trust me, the revenge was absolutely worth the wait. My name is Seraphina, and for 26 years I believed my family respected me. I was wrong. The boundary violations started small after I moved into my downtown apartment last spring. My parents, Robert and Miranda, would drop by unannounced. My younger sister, Evangeline, would let herself in to borrow clothes or raid my refrigerator. Initially, I thought this was normal family behavior. The first red flag appeared when I came home from a business trip to find my laptop moved and my desk drawers slightly ajar. When I confronted Evangeline, she laughed it off, claiming she needed to print something urgently. My parents backed her up, saying I was being paranoid and selfish for not helping family. Then, my expensive skincare products started disappearing. My imported tea collection vanished. My grandmother's vintage jewelry, which I kept in a secure box, showed signs of tampering. Each time I raised concerns, my family dismissed them. Evangeline would roll her eyes and call me materialistic. My mother would sigh dramatically about how success had changed me. My father would lecture me about family obligations and ungrateful children. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving. I had explicitly asked my family not to enter my apartment while I visited my college friend in Seattle. I needed space after a particularly stressful project at work. When I returned, my apartment looked like a tornado had hit it. Food containers littered my kitchen counter. My bathroom toiletries were nearly empty. Worst of all, my home office was in complete disarray. I installed security cameras that weekend. What I discovered over the following weeks made my blood boil. Evangeline was not just borrowing items. She was conducting a systematic search through my personal belongings. She photographed documents from my filing cabinet, including tax returns, bank statements, and employment contracts. My parents assisted by acting as lookouts while she worked. During one particularly disturbing incident, I watched my mother pocket my prescription medication, while my father rifled through my bedroom dresser. They were not simply overstepping boundaries. They were violating my privacy in ways I never imagined possible. The recordings showed them discussing my personal life, my salary, my savings, account balance, and even my romantic relationships with disturbing familiarity. But the most shocking discovery came when I enhanced the audio from a recording where Evangeline was on the phone with someone unknown. She was discussing my financial information in detail, mentioning specific amounts from my savings and investment accounts. She talked about my work schedule, my travel plans, and even my dating life as if she was providing intelligence to a third party. I realized they had been accessing my personal information for months, possibly longer. The spare key I had given them for emergencies had become their license to invade every aspect of my private life. They knew about my promotion before I told them. They knew about my investment portfolio. They even knew about the inheritance I had received from my great aunt, which I had not shared with anyone. The financial implications became clear when I checked my credit report and discovered several inquiries I had not authorized. Someone had attempted to open a credit card in my name using my personal information. The address on the application was my apartment, but the contact phone number belonged to Evangeline. When I confronted them with printouts of my credit report, they reacted with fury rather than shame. Evangeline accused me of spying on my own family. My parents claimed I was being paranoid and suggested I was having a mental health crisis. They turned the situation around, making me feel guilty for protecting my own privacy and financial security. Their gaslighting strategy almost worked. For a brief moment, I questioned whether I was overreacting. Maybe families did share everything. Maybe I was being too protective of information that should be common knowledge among relatives. But then I remembered the unauthorized credit card application and the way Evangeline had been photographing my personal documents. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not just move out. I would disappear completely and let them face the consequences of their actions. I started planning my exit strategy immediately, knowing that my family had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. The next morning, I began searching for a new apartment in a different part of the city. I opened new bank accounts at a different institution. I changed my phone number and email address. Most importantly, I started documenting everything they had done, knowing that their behavior might escalate once they realized I was no longer accessible. What I did not know was that their violations of my privacy were just the beginning. The real betrayal was still hidden, waiting to be discovered in the most devastating way possible. 2 weeks later, I executed my disappearing act with military precision. I hired movers during the day when my family was at work, transferred my belongings to a secure storage unit, and officially terminated my lease. But I left something behind that would expose the depth of their betrayal. A hidden camera system that would continue recording everything that happened in the empty apartment. I did not tell them I was moving. I simply stopped responding to their calls and messages. When Evangeline tried to enter the apartment 3 days later, she found it completely empty, except for the furniture that belonged to the landlord. The shock on her face when she realized I had vanished was priceless. But what happened next revealed the true extent of their deception. Within hours of discovering the empty apartment, my family went into full panic mode. But instead of calling me to ask where I had gone, they made a series of phone calls that exposed their real motivations. The hidden cameras captured everything. Evangeline immediately called someone named Marcus, frantically explaining that their source of information had dried up. She mentioned specific financial details about my accounts and expressed concern about losing access to what she called their meal ticket. The conversation revealed that she had been selling my personal information to this Marcus person for months. But the revelation that destroyed me emotionally came when my parents arrived at the empty apartment. My mother broke down crying not because she was worried about my safety, but because she was terrified about losing what she called their backup plan. My father paced angrily, shouting about how ungrateful I was and how I had ruined everything they had worked for. Then my mother said something that shattered my heart completely. She told my father that they should have moved faster with their plan to take out a loan using my credit and property as collateral. They had been planning to commit fraud using my identity, and my disappearance had ruined their timeline. The recorded conversations revealed a conspiracy that had been years in the making. Evangeline had been gathering my personal information not just for Marcus, but to help our parents establish a false financial profile. They had planned to use my excellent credit score and financial stability to secure loans and credit lines that they would never intend to repay. My father, who I had always respected as an honest businessman, had been laid off from his job 8 months earlier and had hidden this information from me. Instead of asking for help or finding new employment, he had decided to solve his financial problems by exploiting my success. My mother, who had always preached about family loyalty and honesty, had been the mastermind behind the identity theft scheme. The most painful discovery was learning that my recent promotion and salary increase had accelerated their timeline. They had not been proud of my professional success. They had been calculating how much money they could steal using my improved financial profile. Every family dinner where they celebrated my achievements had been a performance designed to keep me close while they planned my financial destruction. Evangeline's role was particularly devastating because she had been my closest family member. Growing up, she had been my confidant and my biggest supporter. Learning that she had spent months photographing my personal documents and selling my information felt like the ultimate betrayal. She had been treating our relationship like a business transaction, mining my trust for financial gain. The recordings also revealed that they had already taken preliminary steps toward their fraud scheme. They had obtained copies of my driver's license, social security card, and passport during their apartment invasions. They had memorized my banking information and had even created fake email accounts using variations of my name to intercept financial communications. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when my mother called her sister, my Aunt Patricia, to complain about my disappearance. During this conversation, she revealed that they had been planning to frame me for their financial crimes if they were caught. They intended to claim that I had authorized the loans and credit applications using my family relationships as evidence of my supposed agreement to help them. This conversation made me realize that their plan was not just theft. It was a calculated attempt to destroy my life completely. If their scheme had succeeded, I would have been left with destroyed credit, massive debt, and potentially criminal charges. They were willing to sacrifice my entire future to solve their temporary financial problems. The legal implications of what I had discovered were staggering. Identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted financial crimes were serious felonies that could result in significant prison time. But the emotional damage was even worse. I had lost my entire family in a single moment, realizing that their love for me had always been conditional on my usefulness to them. As I watched the recordings of their panic and their angry discussions about my disappearance, I felt a strange combination of heartbreak and relief. I was devastated to learn that my family had never truly respected me as a person, but I was grateful that I had discovered their betrayal before they could destroy my life completely. The evidence I had gathered was overwhelming and undeniable. Every conversation was recorded in high definition with crystal clear audio. Their admission of guilt was explicit and detailed, but I knew that simply having evidence was not enough. I needed to decide how to use it strategically to protect myself and ensure that justice was served. That night, I began planning my next move, carefully knowing that my family's reaction to my disappearance was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning. The recordings from my empty apartment continued to provide devastating evidence of my family's criminal conspiracy. Over the following week, they returned multiple times each visit, revealing new layers of their deception and their increasingly desperate attempts to salvage their fraud scheme. On their fourth visit, my parents brought a locksmith to break into the apartment unaware that I had already surrendered my keys to the landlord. When they discovered that the locks had been changed and their spare key no longer worked, Their conversation revealed the full scope of their criminal network. My father made a series of phone calls to people I had never heard of, discussing something called the investment opportunity and explaining that their inside source had become unavailable. These conversations indicated that my family had been selling my personal information to multiple parties, not just the Marcus person Evangeline had mentioned earlier. But the most disturbing revelation came when my mother called her financial advisor, a man named Kenneth Rivera, to discuss their backup options. During this conversation, she mentioned that they had already submitted loan applications using my information and were worried about the consequences if those applications were processed without my knowledge. This conversation prompted me to immediately check my credit report again, where I discovered 3 new inquiries from lending institutions I had never contacted. Someone had applied for a personal loan, a home equity line of credit, and a business loan using my identity, employment information, and financial details. The applications had been submitted just days before I moved out, which explained my family's panic when they discovered my disappearance. I realized that I needed professional help to address the scope of their criminal activity. That morning, I contacted Elena Vasquez, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in financial fraud cases. Elena had been recommended by a colleague who had dealt with identity theft issues in the past. Elena's response to my evidence was immediate and emphatic. She explained that my family had committed multiple felonies and that their recorded confessions provided ironclad evidence for criminal prosecution. But she also warned me that family-based financial crimes were often complicated by emotional manipulation and could be difficult to prosecute if the victim was reluctant to pursue charges. I assured Elena that my emotional attachment to my family had been completely severed by their betrayal. I wanted full criminal prosecution and civil recovery for any financial damages they had caused. Elena agreed to represent me and immediately began preparing legal action. Our first step was to contact the lending institutions where my identity had been used fraudulently. Elena's legal connections expedited this process, and within 48 hours, we had confirmed that 3 loan applications totaling over $200,000 had been submitted using my personal information. The personal loan application for $50,000 had already been approved and was scheduled for funding within the week. The home equity application had been flagged for additional verification because the property address did not match my current address on file. The business loan application was still under review, but the requested amount of $120,000 indicated the massive scale of their intended theft. Elena immediately filed fraud alerts with all 3 lenders and initiated the process of having the applications declared invalid due to identity theft. She also helped me place security freezes on my credit files and contact law enforcement to file formal criminal complaints. But Elena suggested that we needed additional evidence to strengthen our case and recommended that I contact David Kim, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud investigations. David's expertise would help us trace the full extent of my family's criminal network and identify all parties involved in the conspiracy. David's investigation revealed connections that I had never suspected. The Marcus person that Evangeline had been working with was actually Marcus Thompson, a convicted felon who operated an identity theft ring that targeted successful professionals through their family members. Evangeline had been recruited into this network months earlier and had been receiving payments for providing detailed personal information about potential victims. Kenneth Rivera, my mother's financial advisor, was also connected to Marcus Thompson's operation. Kenneth had been using his legitimate financial business as a front for processing fraudulent loan applications and had been splitting profits with the identity theft network. My family had not just been planning to steal from me. They had been recruited into an organized criminal enterprise. The investigation also revealed that my family had attempted to target other relatives. David discovered that they had gathered personal information about my cousin Michael and my uncle James, suggesting that their criminal activity extended beyond their plans to defraud me. But perhaps the most valuable alliance came through David's investigation. He connected me with Sarah Chen, a federal prosecutor who had been building a case against Marcus Thompson's identity theft network for over a year. Sarah explained that my family's recordings and evidence could be the breakthrough her investigation needed to bring down the entire criminal organization. Sarah offered me federal protection and witness status in exchange for my cooperation in the broader investigation. This meant that my case would become part of a larger federal prosecution that could result in more severe penalties for all parties involved, including my family members. The decision to cooperate with federal prosecutors was difficult because it meant that my family would face federal charges rather than just state-level financial crimes. But Elena and Sarah both emphasized that my family had made their choices and that their criminal activity had endangered other innocent people beyond just me. As our alliance of legal professionals built our case, we continued monitoring the recordings from my old apartment. My family's visits became increasingly desperate and revealing. During one particularly damaging conversation, my father discussed plans to claim that I had given them permission to use my identity and that our family dispute was actually a misunderstanding about authorized financial assistance. This conversation proved that they were not only unrepentant about their crimes, but were actively planning to lie under oath to avoid consequences. Their willingness to perjure themselves and falsely accuse me of authorizing their criminal activity eliminated any remaining doubts I had about pursuing full prosecution. Elena, David, and Sarah worked together to prepare a comprehensive case that would address both the immediate crimes against me and the broader criminal network that had recruited my family. We documented every recorded conversation, traced every financial transaction, and identified every person involved in the conspiracy. But just as our case was reaching completion, we discovered that one member of our alliance was not who they claimed to be, and this revelation would nearly destroy everything we had worked to build. 3 weeks into building our federal case, I received a phone call that shattered my confidence in our legal team. Elena called me at midnight, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. David Kim, the private investigator we had trusted with our most sensitive evidence, had been secretly working with Marcus Thompson's criminal network the entire time. The betrayal was discovered when Sarah's federal team noticed inconsistencies in David's investigation reports. While reviewing surveillance footage from Marcus Thompson's known associates, federal agents identified David meeting with Kenneth Rivera, my mother's corrupt financial advisor, at a downtown restaurant. The meeting had taken place just 2 days after David had supposedly begun investigating Kenneth as part of our case. Sarah's team conducted a deeper investigation into David's background and discovered that he had been feeding information to the criminal network for months. His supposed expertise in financial fraud investigation was actually experience in facilitating financial fraud. He had been providing Marcus Thompson with detailed profiles of potential victims, including information about their family relationships and financial vulnerabilities. The realization that David had access to all of our evidence was terrifying. He knew about the recordings from my apartment, the details of my family's confession, and most dangerously, my current location and contact information. Elena immediately moved me to a secure location and arranged for federal protection while we assessed the damage to our case. But David's betrayal extended beyond simple information sharing. Sarah's investigation revealed that he had been systematically sabotaging our case from the beginning. The loan applications that we thought we had successfully canceled were still being processed through alternative channels that David had helped establish. He had provided Marcus Thompson with enough advance warning to modify their criminal strategy and avoid the federal investigation. Most devastating of all, David had been recording our strategy sessions and sharing them with the criminal network. This meant that my family and their criminal associates knew exactly what evidence we had against them and how we planned to use it in court. They had been preparing counter strategies and false alibis while we thought we were building an airtight case. The scope of David's betrayal became clear when Sarah discovered that he had been planning to destroy the most damaging evidence against the criminal network. The recordings from my apartment, which contained explicit confessions from my family and detailed discussions of their criminal plans, had been copied by David with the intention of making the originals disappear before trial. Elena was devastated by her failure to properly vet David before bringing him into our case. She had worked with him on previous investigations and had never suspected that he was operating a double agenda. His betrayal had not only damaged our case, but had potentially endangered my safety and the safety of other victims in the federal investigation. The immediate consequence of David's betrayal was that we lost the element of surprise in our prosecution strategy. My family and the criminal network now knew exactly what evidence we possessed and could prepare sophisticated defenses to counter our accusations. They could also potentially claim that our evidence had been obtained improperly or had been tampered with during David's involvement in the case. But the personal impact was even more devastating than the legal complications. David's betrayal felt like a repeat of my family's deception, confirming my worst fears about trusting anyone with my safety and security. Just when I thought I had found reliable allies to help me seek justice, one of them had been secretly working against me from the beginning. Sarah and Elena worked frantically to minimize the damage to our case. They conducted a comprehensive review of all evidence that David had accessed and implemented additional security measures to protect the remaining investigation. But they warned me that David's betrayal might force us to modify our prosecution strategy significantly. The federal investigation into David's role in the criminal network revealed connections that extended far beyond my family's case. He had been facilitating identity theft schemes for years, using his legitimate private investigation business as cover for criminal activity. His client list included dozens of victims who thought they were hiring him to investigate financial crimes when he was actually helping to perpetrate them. This discovery led to a broader federal investigation that ultimately strengthened our case against my family and the criminal network. But in the short term, David's betrayal created chaos and uncertainty about whether we would be able to achieve justice through the legal system. During this crisis, my family made their most aggressive move yet. Using information that David had provided about my location, Evangeline appeared at my temporary residence with a proposal that revealed the true depth of their desperation and manipulation. She claimed that the entire situation had been a misunderstanding, and that David had convinced them to participate in what they thought were legitimate financial planning activities. She insisted that they had never intended to defraud me, and that their recorded confessions had been taken out of context. She offered to make full restitution and suggested that we could resolve everything privately without involving law enforcement. But Evangeline's performance was contradicted by new evidence that Sarah's team had gathered independently of David's compromised investigation. Bank records showed that my family had already received significant payments from Marcus Thompson's network, confirming that their participation in the criminal conspiracy was voluntary and ongoing. The federal investigation had also uncovered communications between my family and David that revealed their knowledge of his true role in the criminal network. They had not been deceived by David. They had been collaborating with him to undermine our legal case while maintaining the appearance of cooperation with law enforcement. This evidence proved that my family's criminal activity was more sophisticated and intentional than we had originally believed. They were not just greedy relatives who had made bad decisions. They were active participants in an organized criminal enterprise who were willing to use violence and intimidation to protect their interests. The revelation that my own family had been working with David to sabotage my pursuit of justice was the final betrayal that eliminated any possibility of reconciliation. They had not only stolen from me and planned to destroy my financial life, they had actively worked to prevent me from seeking legal protection and justice. Just when our case seemed most vulnerable due to David's betrayal, an unexpected ally emerged who would provide the evidence we needed to secure victory. Rebecca Martinez, a forensic accountant with the FBI's white-collar crime division, had been independently investigating Marcus Thompson's network and had developed evidence that corroborated our case without any involvement from the compromised David Kim. Rebecca's investigation had begun 6 months earlier, when several banks reported unusual patterns in loan applications that suggested systematic identity theft. Her forensic analysis had identified Marcus Thompson as the center of a criminal network that was processing fraudulent applications through corrupt financial advisors like Kenneth Rivera. What made Rebecca's evidence so valuable was that it had been gathered completely independently of our case and David's involvement. Her investigation included bank records, communication intercepts, and financial transaction analyses that proved my family's participation in the criminal network without relying on any evidence that David had potentially compromised. Rebecca's forensic analysis revealed that my family had been receiving structured payments from Marcus Thompson's network for over 8 months, well before I had discovered their apartment invasions. The payments correlated directly with times when my personal information had been accessed and shared, proving that their criminal activity was systematic and ongoing, rather than opportunistic. But Rebecca's most important contribution was her discovery of additional victims within Marcus Thompson's network. Her investigation identified 12 other families where trusted relatives had been recruited to gather personal information for identity theft purposes. This pattern of family-based recruitment proved that my case was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader criminal strategy. The evidence from other victims strengthened our case significantly because it demonstrated Marcus Thompson's criminal methods and eliminated any possibility that my family could claim they had been deceived or manipulated. The other cases showed a consistent pattern where family members were fully aware of the criminal nature of their activities and were compensated accordingly. Rebecca also discovered that Kenneth Rivera had been maintaining detailed records of his fraudulent loan processing activities, apparently for blackmail purposes against his criminal associates. These records included specific information about my family's case, including copies of my personal documents and transcripts of recorded conversations between my parents and Evangeline. These records proved that my family had provided Kenneth with far more personal information than we had realized from our apartment recordings. They had been systematically gathering data about my financial accounts, employment benefits, insurance policies, and even my personal relationships to create a comprehensive profile for identity theft purposes. But perhaps most importantly, Rebecca's investigation revealed that David Kim had been working with Marcus Thompson to identify and recruit families with access to high-value identity theft targets. David's legitimate private investigation business had been used as a front to approach families like mine who had successful relatives with excellent credit and substantial assets. This discovery meant that David's involvement in our case had not been coincidental. He had likely identified me as a target through his criminal network connections and had manipulated Elena into recommending him as our investigator. His betrayal had been planned from the beginning, rather than opportunistic. Rebecca worked with Sarah and Elena to rebuild our prosecution strategy using evidence that had never been accessible to David. Her forensic analysis provided ironclad proof of the criminal conspiracy that could not be challenged or compromised by David's betrayal. The bank records, communication intercepts, and financial analyses were all independently verifiable and supported by federal investigation resources. The new evidence also revealed that my family had been planning additional crimes beyond the loan applications we had already discovered. Kenneth Rivera's records showed that they had been working on a scheme to use my identity to establish fake business entities that could be used for money laundering and tax fraud. These business entities would have been structured to appear legitimate while actually serving as vehicles for processing stolen money from other identity theft victims. My family would have been responsible for managing these fake businesses, using my credit and personal information to establish credibility with banks and government agencies. The scope of this expanded criminal plan was staggering. If successful, my family would have been responsible for laundering hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen money while destroying my reputation and potentially exposing me to serious criminal liability. Their willingness to involve me in money laundering operations showed that their criminal ambitions extended far beyond simple financial fraud. Rebecca's investigation also identified the specific roles that each family member had been assigned within the criminal network. Evangeline had been responsible for gathering personal information and maintaining contact with targets. My mother had been assigned to handle communication with Kenneth Rivera and coordinate loan applications. My father had been responsible for establishing the fake business entities and managing money laundering operations. This division of labor proved that their criminal activity was highly organized, and that each family member had specific expertise and responsibilities within the conspiracy. They were not amateur criminals who had stumbled into identity theft. They were experienced operators who had been trained and supported by an established criminal network. The evidence gathered by Rebecca's independent investigation eliminated any possibility that my family could claim innocence or victimhood in their criminal prosecution. The bank records and communication intercepts proved their voluntary participation in the conspiracy, while the scope of their planned crimes demonstrated their criminal intent and sophistication. But Rebecca's most valuable contribution was her analysis of the financial damage that my family's crimes had caused to other victims. Her investigation revealed that the criminal network had stolen over $2 million from identity theft victims, with my family directly responsible for facilitating theft of approximately $300,000. This financial analysis would allow us to pursue both criminal prosecution and civil recovery against my family and their criminal associates. The evidence of their profits from criminal activity would support asset forfeiture actions that could provide restitution to victims while ensuring that my family could not benefit financially from their crimes. As Rebecca integrated her evidence with our existing case materials, it became clear that we now had an overwhelming foundation for successful prosecution. The independent verification of our evidence eliminated David's ability to sabotage our case, while the expanded scope of the criminal network ensured that federal prosecutors would pursue maximum penalties. The federal prosecution moved forward with devastating efficiency. Within 30 days of Rebecca joining our legal team, grand jury indictments were issued against my entire family. Marcus Thompson's criminal network, Kenneth Rivera, and David Kim. The charges included identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering conspiracy, and racketeering under federal organized crime statutes. My family's reaction to their arrests was exactly what I expected. They continued to maintain their innocence while attempting to blame everyone else for their criminal choices. Evangeline claimed that Marcus Thompson had manipulated her into believing their activities were legal. My parents insisted that Kenneth Rivera had convinced them they were participating in legitimate financial planning. None of them accepted responsibility for their deliberate decision to steal my identity and destroy my financial security. The federal trial lasted 6 weeks and resulted in complete victory for justice. The evidence Rebecca had gathered, combined with the recordings from my apartment and testimony from other victims, created an insurmountable case against the criminal network. My family's recorded confessions and their detailed discussions of criminal plans eliminated any possibility of reasonable doubt about their guilt. Marcus Thompson received 15 years in federal prison for leading the identity theft network. Kenneth Rivera received 12 years for his role in processing fraudulent loans and money laundering. David Kim received 10 years for his betrayal of victims and obstruction of federal investigation. Each of them was also ordered to pay substantial restitution to the victims they had defrauded. My family's sentences reflected their willing participation in serious federal crimes. My father received 8 years for money laundering conspiracy and identity theft. My mother received 6 years for wire fraud and criminal conspiracy. Evangeline, despite being the youngest, received 7 years because of her central role in gathering victim information and recruiting other family members into criminal activity. But the financial consequences were equally devastating for them. The federal court ordered complete asset forfeiture of all property and accounts that had been purchased or funded with proceeds from their criminal activity. Their house cars, bank accounts, and investment portfolios were all seized and liquidated to provide restitution to victims. The civil lawsuit that Elena filed on my behalf resulted in additional financial recovery. The court awarded damages for emotional distress, invasion of privacy, identity theft, and punitive damages designed to deter similar criminal behavior. The total judgment exceeded $400,000, ensuring that my family would face financial consequences for decades beyond their prison sentences. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was the complete collapse of their social standing and reputation in our community. The federal trial was covered extensively by local media, and their criminal convictions became public record. Their friends, neighbors, and former colleagues learned exactly what kind of people they really were and how they had been willing to destroy their own daughter's life for financial gain. The extended family members who had initially criticized me for pursuing criminal charges against my own relatives eventually acknowledged that I had made the right decision. The evidence presented during the trial made it clear that my family had been planning to frame me for their crimes if they had been caught, which helped other relatives understand the scope of their betrayal. During the months of legal proceedings, I discovered something unexpected and wonderful. My chosen family of allies had become more supportive and trustworthy than my biological family had ever been. Elena, Sarah, and Rebecca had not only helped me achieve justice, but had become genuine friends who respected my boundaries and valued my well-being. Elena continued representing me in ongoing legal matters and became a trusted advisor for major life decisions. Sarah kept me informed about the broader federal investigation and helped me understand how my case had contributed to dismantling an entire criminal network. Rebecca became a mentor who taught me about financial security and helped me implement systems to protect myself from future identity theft. These professional relationships evolved into personal friendships based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for each other's success and happiness. Unlike my biological family who had seen me as a resource to be exploited, my chosen family valued me as a person and supported my goals without expecting anything in return. I also connected with other victims from the federal case, and we formed a support network for people who had experienced family-based identity theft. This group became an important source of healing and advocacy, helping new victims navigate the legal system while working to raise awareness about the unique challenges of crimes committed by trusted family members. The financial recovery from the civil lawsuit allowed me to purchase a beautiful home in a secure community where I finally felt safe and respected. I invested in advanced security systems and financial monitoring services, but more importantly, I learned to trust my instincts about people and relationships. My career flourished after the stress and distraction of the criminal case were resolved. The skills I had developed in investigating my family's crimes and building a legal case translated surprisingly well to my professional work, and I received a significant promotion within 6 months of the trial's conclusion. But the most important growth came from learning to value myself and my boundaries. The experience of being betrayed by my entire family taught me that blood relationships do not automatically deserve trust or loyalty. Real family is built on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine care. Qualities that my biological family had never demonstrated. Today, 3 years after discovering my family's betrayal, I live a life surrounded by people who value and respect me for who I am, rather than what they can take from me. My chosen family of friends, mentors, and fellow survivors provides the love and support that I never received from my biological relatives. The lessons I learned from this experience have made me a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate person. And more, I no longer assume that family relationships are automatically healthy or that forgiveness requires accepting continued abuse. I have learned that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from people who refuse to respect your worth. Looking back, I am grateful that my family's greed and criminality were exposed before they could destroy my life completely. Their betrayal was devastating, but it also freed me from a toxic dynamic that had been limiting my potential for years. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could happen to you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-protection? Have you experienced the moment when you realize that blood relationships do not guarantee love or respect? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments about how family betrayal changed your perspective on relationships and trust. If this story of justice and recovery resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others who might be struggling with similar family dynamics find this video. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming betrayal and building chosen family, because everyone deserves relationships based on respect rather than exploitation. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it is okay to prioritize your safety and well-being over family expectations. Thank you for supporting survivors and for believing that justice and healing are possible even after the deepest betrayals. Remember that your worth is not determined by how others treat you, especially family members who refuse to respect your boundaries. You deserve relationships built on love, respect, and mutual support. Sometimes the family you choose becomes more precious than the family you were born into. And that is not something to feel guilty about. That is something to celebrate.